Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Chris Wilson, certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, coming at you today with another Facebook Live. This one's a little later than normal. I've been really busy today and didn't get to go live at my desired time, 12:30, which is normally when I go live. But this is being recorded, so it will be put together in a YouTube video for you. And just real briefly, I want to talk to you about celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, autoimmunity, leaky gut, and why you should join my Facebook group, Health by His Design, or Healthy Gut, Beautiful You. Either one of those, you can join them. I'm thinking about merging the two of them together. So I really appreciate it. So if you have any type of digestive issues or any autoimmune condition, please join those groups. I'm very active in there, and I share a lot of information on how you can help calm down the immune response and the inflammation that goes on to lead and manifest other diseases and conditions. And so I've got a stack of books over here that I wanted to share with you because I truly believe I'm an expert in gut restoration, gut health. That's what I really focus on. And as you know, many other diseases and conditions actually stem from having a leaky gut. This is a great book called Health and Nutrition Secrets. I'm all about the biochemistry on how nutrition can work in our favor and how we can use food as our medicine, along with therapeutic strategies of targeted supplementation based upon your individualized program or protocol, based on your lab findings of what we have going on, so we can have a more honed in approach to help you achieve optimal health once again, and for the first time ever. Another one by gastroenterologist Dr. Andrew Wakefield, creator and producer of the documentary called Vaxxed. This is Waging War on the Autistic Child, a very multifaceted approach to why autistic children have their condition. But Dr. Osborne, no grain, no pain. I just became Tier 1 certified through his gluten-free program, and I'm listed on his website as a practitioner there. Restoring Your Digestive Health. These are books that I have read. I've read all of these at least once, and some I'm going back through a second time. One of my top 5 favorite books by Dr. David Perlmutter, Brain. The Digestion Connection by Dr. Elizabeth Lipsky. And one of my favorites that I'm going through again right now is by Dr. Josh Axe, Eat Dirt. I've got 2 more that I didn't bring out here. Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis, another phenomenal book, and Brain Maker, another one by Dr. David Perlmutter that I think, and all of these talk about the relationship between our brain up here, disease, and our gut, and the health of our gut, and the foods that we eat. Now, more so in particular, this video will be about the celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. And I just want to state that one cannot achieve and maintain health eating unhealthy foods. And I learned that from Dr. Peter Osborne. So first, we must establish an understanding on the difference between gluten and grain. I think there's a lot of misconception, and these 2 words have truly caused a mass confusion and have allowed a very profitable market to arise within the food industry with massive marketing schemes on the gluten-free diet. So in order to make an informed decision of what a person should or should not eat when it pertains to gluten-free foods, we need to lay a foundation on precisely conveying what gluten is. And as a side note, traditionally, gluten sensitivity and celiac disease have been used as interchangeable terms because that is where the focus of much of the research has been. These 2 terms have been created in the medical literature to separate both celiac and gluten sensitivity from one another, and hopefully we can dispel that here. So what is gluten? The general definition is that gluten is a storage protein found in grains, and grains are the seeds of grasses. So what are common foods that contain gluten? These would be your typical breads, pastas, cereals, muffins, and most alcohol like beer and many distilled liquors like vodka. Yet where does most of the confusion take place when avoiding gluten and adhering to the traditional gluten-free diet occur? Now, to better understand this and be able to differentiate the confusing realm of gluten, we really need to take a closer look at gluten itself and what most mainstream literature like Dr. Google has to say. You know, after all, that is where many go to obtain their understanding. That is the infamous Dr. Google, right? So gluten really is a mixture of a protein that's found in all grains. Yes, I said all grains. It's composed really of two primary subfractions of prolamines and glutenins. I know this is going to kind of get into a lot of science here, but what I'm wanting you to understand is the difference between grain, gluten, gluten-free diet, celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition of the small intestine, and then non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So the takeaway here is that most studied gluten is the prolamine gliadin as it relates to celiac disease. Okay, so now the prolamine side of gluten, that is gliadin. So we have this protein within the gluten called alpha gliadin. This is found in the grains of cereal crops such as wheat, barley, rye, corn, and oats. So many think that the word gluten is a singular protein, and this is very crucial to understand. However, it is not. So it should be recognized as a plural form such as glutens with an S on the end. The problem comes because the most widely studied gluten protein, remember, gluten has many forms of protein, rendering it a plural structure. The most studied protein is gliadin. So just remember that gluten is not just one, but it's many. And the most studied in the literature is gliadin. And common sources of gluten proteins are found in wheat, barley, rye, and oats. And you can remember that by BROW, barley, rye, oats, and wheat. So just remember the acronym as your BROW, your eyebrow, but the BROW, barley, rye, oats, and wheat. And so they're also found, however, in millet, rice, corn, sorghum, teff, and many more. And when it comes to understanding a traditional gluten-free diet versus a true grain-free diet, here is what we need to comprehend. So what is a traditional gluten-free diet? And I'm reading off of an article that I wrote and submitted into Dr. Osborne to pass his certification. A traditional gluten-free diet. So this is based on outdated science, upwards of 60 years. It only considers wheat, barley, rye, and sometimes oats. It makes no mention of dairy from grain-fed animals, makes no mention of grains used in the processing of different foods or pharmaceuticals, and it's not concerned with health restoration, meaning the removal of these foods to offer healing. So when you think of Synthroid, which was like the #1 prescribed drug in 2014 and 15, I could be wrong on my years there. I'll have to go back and double check. But this drug, Synthroid, is a synthetic version of T4 given to many hypothyroidism patients, and it actually has gluten in it. And it's not one that I recommend, because if you've got any type of genetic susceptibility or food sensitivity or celiac disease and you're hypothyroid and you're taking Synthroid, well, you're exacerbating the problem, because your prescription that your doctor gave you, who unknowingly or who is ignorant of this prescription containing gluten, is actually feeding or fueling your problem even more. So what is a true gluten or grain-free diet? And that's heavily outlined with a lot of science in Dr. Osborne's book, No Grain, No Pain. So a true gluten or a true grain-free diet eliminates all grains based on new scientific findings. It looks at the potential for gluten in dairy based from the diet of the animals. It considers processed foods with gluten for cross-contamination. Now think about this, is that it only takes for a reaction to occur in one breadcrumb is all it takes for a reaction. So that's like 20 parts per million. So to put that into perspective, that'd be like taking an eyedropper and dropping one droplet of water of that eyedropper into a 5-gallon bucket. So just imagine that that's all of it takes. So eating that little piece of cake, or having your cheat day and eating that chocolate chip cookie or that pizza, you can develop and create antibodies for up to 6 months and have an underlying level of inflammation occurring because of that one day or that one time. So just remember that. So it also, a true grain-free diet considers processed foods. Okay, we said that. Considers GMOs, so genetically modified organisms in foods. Those have a very cross reaction. And then focuses on health restoration and maintenance, because many people feel once they get onto a program, they feel substantially better than when they first started. And so they think that they can revert back to having, like I said, some of these foods. And then they just disrupt their whole healing journey and have to almost start over. It's like taking one step forward and 10 steps back, so to speak. So why the focus on wheat, barley, rye, and oats? Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of history here, but so in Europe around World War II, a doctor by the name of Wilhelm Dick or Dickey noticed an improvement of patients' digestive issues during a shortage of grains during his time. He noticed that when grains came back into consumption, these patients' illnesses would relapse. And I quoted some scientific literature here from PubMed that states this. So why do so many people fail when prescribed a traditional gluten-free diet? Now, let's answer this by asking another question. Where do people who substitute gluten for gluten-free foods go wrong? That's the important question. And the answer is boxed and processed foods that are labeled gluten-free. And that's because the food industry knows that they can make a massive profit on doing so. Well, what is the problem? These boxes that are claiming to be gluten-free are actually Gluten. If you remember, I talked about the proteins. So they're not truly gluten-free. They're just free of that one gluten protein that we identified as gliadin in many cases. But the procedures are using pseudo grains, which still contain gluten protein compounds that you might be reacting to. And these are highly refined in place of the traditional gliadin protein of gluten, which can still cause an immune response in the compromised individual, as well as blood sugar spikes. So now we have blood sugar imbalances, which will further create dysfunction in your adrenal glands, pumping out cortisol and adrenaline to deal with the underlying stress response that's going internally, causing you to be adrenally fatigued and also causing you to move toward the spectrum of autoimmunity. Therefore, well, let me back up. The usual learning curve is 8 to 12 weeks when adhering to a gluten-free diet. So many limit their diets to a very strict adherence, not truly understanding what to eat. And one must truly spend the time learning the foods they can and cannot have. That's why I think it's utterly important to do a food sensitivity test, and even sometimes running another test to see if there's any cross-reactivity from other foods that they're eating, or supplements they're taking, or medications that they're on. And this way we can eliminate much of the gasoline that's being thrown onto the fire, fueling a person's inflammatory autoimmune disease. And so if you think about it, you have to really learning if you are going to be susceptible to gluten is the utmost importance here to your health journey, and avoiding processed packaged foods claiming to be gluten-free. And then there's allergens in rice, corn, millet, amaranth, and buckwheat. These also need to be closely examined before recommended as a safe alternative. So therefore, that's why I strongly suggest using genetic testing, because it's really a state of genetics. If I were to go underwater for longer than my body's able to at holding my breath, I'm not just going to genetically be able to grow gills and breathe underwater no more. No, it's a state of genetics. The same could be said as if I jumped off a cliff. I can't just spontaneously sprout wings and begin to fly away. So when I bludgeon myself to death at the rocks below, you don't say that my death was caused of a disease of the inability to sprout wings and fly. It's a state of genetics. The same goes for swimming underwater and drowning. Drowning was not the disease. That was the causal factor of staying underwater long enough, not being able to sprout gills because of a genetic situation. The same is true for being sensitive to gluten. It's a state of genetics. So you're either genetically susceptible or you're not. And that's where I believe the rubber meets the road at really helping people identify that they can or cannot have gluten. So again, as I said, one cannot achieve and maintain health eating unhealthy foods. And as mentioned above, processed and packaged foods, they're not a healthy substitute, even if they're labeled as gluten-free, because these products are still highly refined and have hidden sources of other types of grains and sugars that are really just, harmful to one's health. And, while this is true, another problem is that many of these processed packaged foods are cross-contaminated with gluten from Franken factories that they were made in. And what I mean is factories who use a wide gamut of other foods that are GMO, not truly organic, and you're getting cross-contamination in your food and even your supplements or protein powders for that matter. So for an individual who is susceptible to gluten, it only takes the equivalent of 1 droplet of water in a 5-gallon bucket of water to cause a reaction. And this is initially, like I said, 1 breadcrumb to create antibodies within a person to have an immune reaction that can last up to 6 months. If this isn't enough, most processed packaged foods, gluten-free of course, contain the GMOs or the genetically modified grains and really are completely void of the nutrient-dense material needed for the body to thrive on. So a person may become satiated, meaning they feel full, but yet remain malnutritious because their body is not actually absorbing any of the nutrients. So I want to deviate from the above discussion now and move into the difference between non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease itself, as these are two very different conditions, but they're closely related. In the words of my mentor, Dr. Peter Osborne, clinical symptoms of celiac disease taught in graduate school are extreme weight loss, diarrhea, stomach pain, bloating, and vomiting. But in actuality, symptoms can be, and they're usually systemic, and we know that different people respond in different ways. So gluten sensitivity is not in of itself a disease, whereas celiac, on the other hand, is a disease. Gluten sensitivity is a state of genetics, as I've explained before, with the analogy of underwater drowning and jumping off a cliff. And if ignored, this can actually, so get this, gluten sensitivity, if ignored, can trigger a disease. And guess what one of those diseases is? You're right, celiac disease. So one who is genetically susceptible to gluten and continues eating this deleterious crop may expect conditions as, but not limited to, thyroid disease like Hashimoto's or Graves', cancer, especially non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, and fibromyalgia are just a few. Gluten sensitivity is really a primary contributor to the length and quality of life that one may experience. And so what is gluten sensitivity anyway? The outdated or antiquated and yet current definition is as follows. Gluten sensitivity is an immune reaction to the protein gluten found in wheat, barley, and rye. And the definition sometimes includes oats and sometimes does not. So this definition is oftentimes incorrectly used synonymously with celiac disease, and we need also to consider the following. Well, what about those without celiac symptoms? And what about other gluten-containing grains that we mentioned above? So first, I want to address 4 terms, and we'll wrap this up: gluten allergy, gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity, and celiac disease. So gluten allergy is typically considered to be an immune-mediated response. Gluten intolerance, as the name suggests, is typically the inability to tolerate gluten. And then we have immune and non-immune mediated. Gluten sensitivity is a combination of the 2 previous definitions, and celiac disease is really just an autoimmune disease of the small intestine that's induced by gluten damage. And it's important to know that gluten sensitivity causes celiac disease, yet one can have gluten sensitivity without actually having celiac disease itself. So here is a direct quote from an article, and I quote the source here, and I'll post a link for this below. Celiac disease is an autoimmune enteropathy triggered by the ingestion of gluten. Gluten-sensitive individuals cannot tolerate gluten and may develop gastrointestinal symptoms to those in celiac disease. This study shows that the 2 gluten-associated disorders, celiac disease and gluten sensitivity, are different clinical entities, and it contributes to the characterization of gluten sensitivity as a condition associated with prevalent gluten-induced activation of innate rather than the adaptive immune responses in the absence of detectable changes in mucosal barrier function. Now, if you're interested and want to read more of this article, I will post this below in the comments section so that you folks can read it at your leisure, and I encourage you to do so. But it's really important to understand that leaky gut is a driving factor to autoimmune disease. And we really have to understand that what we eat can rather be harming or healing to us. So it's very important to note that one must be diligent about the foods they eat if they have any type of autoimmune condition, because most autoimmune conditions are driven from a genetic susceptibility, the environment that you're exposed to, whether that's the environment you work in, the environment you create from your dinner table, the foods you put into your mouth, the type of stress that you have going on, whether it's physical, chemical, or mental, emotional, and then a leaky gut. All three of those contribute and are drivers to an autoimmune condition. And a lot of times when one person has one autoimmune condition, I find it very common that they have multiple autoimmune conditions and don't even realize it. And yet, oftentimes, many of these conditions go misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, and you get 6 or 7 other medications to take because of other issues that are just, related to the condition that's not being really looked at the root cause. And so if you have any questions whatsoever about your digestive health, again, I really encourage you to hop on over to my Facebook group, Healthy Gut, Beautiful You, or Health by His Design. Again, I'm going to merge those two together, and you can visit my website and reach out to me from there. But I really appreciate you guys coming on here and watching this Facebook video. I truly believe I'm an expert when it comes to gut health and restoring gut health for a vibrant, beautiful you from the inside out. And take care. And tomorrow I will see you at 12:30 in the afternoon, Central Standard Time. I'm in Texas. And you have a blessed afternoon, and we'll see you on the next one, everyone. Thanks. Take care.